Well, hello, hello. We're back again for another Other Ink Thursday, and I called up my good friend Tristan Zimmerman again to tell us more about gameable history for your table. Tristan, hello.
It's a delight to be here, Matt. Thank you so much for having me.
It is always a delight to have you. So I'm glad it goes both ways. So I I told you this in the email before we started planning the session. Like maybe for the first time ever, I'm actually caught up on Molten Sulfur blog. So I've definitely read these two blog posts that you've brought for us today, no matter which ones they are. Like I have read them because I'm currently caught up on the blog.
Well, the blog is every other week now, so it's a little less of a
It,
challenge
that is
to catch
certainly
up
that's
than it
certainly a
was
contributing factor. Certainly a
for
contributing factor.
6 years of every week never miss an update, which in hindsight, like I cannot believe I did that. But but yeah. So I have brought for you and for your fine listeners two blog posts from kind of early United States history. I'll take this opportunity to plug. I've been doing a lot of freelance work for a company called Flagbearer Games that puts out a Revolutionary War role-playing game called Nations and Cannons. So been reading uh, I don't have them easily at hand. I'd just be like, I've been reading all these books
Right.
about the American Revolution as part of doing the research to make sure that my writing is good. And so I've been stumbling across things that's like I should write a blog post about this. This is amazing. So yeah, I've brought two such posts.
Excellent. Which one do you want to talk about first?
I think we should talk about some weird goings on at the capture of Fort Ticonderoga in 1775. Now, I know some folks in the audience are just going to be like, "Oh, I dimly remember that from like high school or something." Like Fort Ticonderoga, that's a phrase. But like, no, don't turn off your YouTube. Like this is it is a lot cooler, I think, than your high school history teacher made it seem.
Well,
Uh,
I'm sure they did their best, but I think it's
Yes.
more about you being 14 to 17 when you heard about it the last time. So,
Yeah, and also your high school history teacher had a list of educational standards
oh
like
man,
this long that they
it's
had to
literally a
squeeze
book.
into a 45-minute lecture.
It's literally a
Uh
book.
yeah.
Anyway,
But yeah, so 1775, set the stage for you. Um, the 13 of Britain's American colonies. We'll go on later to call them the 13 colonies, but that's
right.
that's not really the way that anybody was thinking about them at the time. They were just a subset of colonies because Britain had a bunch more colonies in North America besides the 13. But 13 of these colonies were starting to get unhappy with British rule. They were quite unhappy, particularly in New England. And this kind of had all come to a head. There were some minor skirmishes, later called the Battles of Lexington and Concord outside Boston. Um, and these 13 colonies had formed a Congress of delegates called the Continental Congress. And people at this point, people could tell what was going on, right? Like this is the start of of a serious war. Like I've had the opportunity to read letters and journals from the period, and you read what people are saying, and they're definitely like they understand what is about to happen here. Um, and so people are starting to think about a place in what is today upstate New York called Fort Ticonderoga. Now, Fort Ticonderoga lies on a very important water route from between Canada and the Hudson River. And the Hudson River runs north-south through New York State. It connects to New York City, which at the time was a super duper important city, as it in fact still is. Um, and if you wanted to go from British possessions in Canada to to New York City, and the rich farmland of the Hudson River Valley. Um, you could take a ship and you could sail through the Atlantic Ocean and go around, or you could take much smaller boats and cut through along through lakes and rivers and portages through the mainland. And Fort Ticonderoga guarded this approach. The fort was initially built by the French during their colonial occupation of the area, and they built this magnificent super fort, right? Like this thing was amazing. Giant walls and towers and like impenetrable.
Well,
Um,
walls and towers. I mean, you're talking about like earth berms with palisades on top, right? You're not talking about like, curtain
I
wall of stone kind
I
of
am
situation.
straight up talking curtain walls of stone.
Oh, really?
Like in addition to the to like giant earth berms and like no, this was a hardcore fort. This
All
was this was
right.
like something you might see in Europe in the time period. This wasn't some like little podunk frontier thing. The French took it very seriously. But through reasons we don't need to get into,
Sure.
it comes into British hands, and the British then proceed to take remarkably poor care of it. They put in a teeny tiny little garrison. They do not devote sufficient funds to do the upkeep on this monster fort, because a monster fort takes a monster amount of money to keep it in fighting trim. And so the fort is starting to kind of crumble. And everybody in the 13 colonies is saying, hey, we really need to take Fort Ticonderoga, because what happens if the British, sure, the British might invade from sea, but they also might invade from Canada. And if we have Fort Ticonderoga, we can stop them from coming down from Canada. So we have to take it. And one of the idea of taking Fort Ticonderoga seems to have come to multiple people simultaneously. But one of these people was a man named Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold, the most famous trader in American
Right,
history.
right.
He's a businessman, and he has this idea about like, hey, we should take Fort Ticonderoga, and also there's a whole bunch of cannons at Fort Ticonderoga, and you know what our like ragtag militia network doesn't have? A bunch of cannons. So if we take the fort, also we can take all these cannons, and it'll be really useful. So, um,
And
Fort
this is just for complete uh transparent, I guess transparency. I don't know. Like this is before he became famous as a
Oh
trader,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, totally. Like that's years down the line. At this
Right.
point, he's a true blue patriot of it's not called the United States yet. They don't really have a name for it yet. But anyway, he he shares this idea with a guy named William Parsons, Samuel Parsons, excuse me. Just like, they're chit-chatting. Uh Benedict Arnold takes word of this, of his idea, to the legislature of Massachusetts. Parsons takes it to the legislature of Connecticut. Um, and the and like both sides are kind of independently organizing, hey, we should try to take Fort Ticonderoga. Simultaneously, there's this weird militia group in what is today Vermont, that is planning to take over Fort Ticonderoga. Now, Vermont at this point is not a separate polity. Vermont is just like some land, that is currently disputed between four different groups. Obviously, group number one is the native folks who live there, who say,
Right.
no, this is ours. Let me explain this to you. There are two different established colonies that both claim the lands of Vermont. And then there are the white people who live in Vermont who say, no, it's ours. We're not any of these other three groups. It's ours. Kick rocks. And this group organizes a militia called the Green Mountain Boys. And because of their proximity to Fort Ticonderoga, the Green Mountain Boys, who have previously clashed with all these other groups, they're the guys on the scene, right? They're the guys who actually have manpower. And they decide they're going to launch a secret sneak attack on Fort Ticonderoga. Word has reached them of the battles of Lexington and Concord. They know that probably what's going to happen is that the British are just going to suddenly plus up their strength at Fort Ticonderoga. The fort's not going to be able to be taken anymore. Um, so so they're going to launch a sneak attack. They secretly move the militia by different routes to the shores of the lake that Fort Ticonderoga overlooks. And as they're doing this move, word reaches Benedict Arnold that the Green Mountain Boys are about to do the thing. You know, the thing that you planned, the thing that was going to make you famous,
Yeah, yeah.
the thing that was going to make everybody say, like, oh, Benedict Arnold, he's a military genius. He took Fort Ticonderoga, which no one thought could be taken. Um, and like, yeah, the Green Mountain Boys are about to do that thing. So Arnold, at this point, he has no funding, he has no soldiers, he has no gunpowder, he has no nothing. What he has is a colonel's commission in the militia of the colony of Massachusetts and a single military aide. And he's just like, oh no, my thing. If I don't rush there right now, I'm not going to be able to take credit for it. So he hightails it to the lake. And with like hours before the attack is about to begin, right? Like Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys, they're scaring up boats to like cross the lake under cover of darkness. And Benedict Arnold, a guy whom I don't believe any of them has ever met before, just like
Hmm.
shows up and says, "Hey guys, it's me, Colonel Benedict Arnold, the mastermind of the thing that you also planned. I'm in charge here. It's me. I see I'm a colonel. See, I got fancy epaulets on my
Yeah, yeah,
jacket.
yeah, yeah.
I'm in charge." And I need to stress that this is really bad. In any
I,
sort of
I imagine this doesn't go over well, but please elaborate.
so in any sort of military operation, but especially in military operations that are, what today we might call unconventional warfare, special operations, irregular, whatever. Um, chain of
Not
command is
dudes in a line
so
shooting at each other.
exactly. Chain of command is so important because everybody needs to know who's actually in charge. If two people are giving conflicting instructions, which instruction do you follow? Um, and so this guy showing up saying, I'm in charge, this presents a serious problem to Ethan Allen because Ethan Allen needs to be in charge, or at least somebody needs to be in charge. And all these, the Green Mountain Boys are not, they're not part of a formal militia, right? They don't really have like a complicated command structure. They don't have fancy pieces of paper issued by an elected legislature. Like they're just some guys. And their personal loyalty is to Ethan Allen. But Ethan Allen has to be cognizant of the political ramifications of just like if he tells Arnold, "Oh, just kick rocks," that's really bad. Arnold is wealthy, he's politically well connected, and he is a colonel, and he does have a formal officers commission from a legislature, and the the American colonies are the patriots, the rebels, whatever you want to call them, are being just really careful about trying to do everything in ways that are like consistent with legality. And like to a certain extent, this is absurd, right? They are rebels. This is a rebellion. Rebellions are by definition illegal.
Well,
Um,
yeah, but they love that kind of stuff because, like in the Declaration of Independence, they're like, "We've petitioned for redress. Here's our list of demands. Like none of them were met. Now we're forced to do this." Like it's very, um,
exactly.
it's very by the book.
Yeah, it is really important to these people that they appear to be doing everything by a legal framework. That's what makes them, that's one of the things that makes them, in their eyes, the good guys. Um, so so the Green Mountain Boys, they're just some dudes, and Arnold is a colonel. But further complicating it, Arnold's colonelcy only gives him authority over Massachusetts troops, which
Right.
none of the Green Mountain Boys are. So like, what on earth is to be done here? And there's so at one point Ethan Allen like offers to split command, which is a terrible idea. And his troops just tell him like, yeah, if you do that, we're leaving. Just FYI.
Hmm.
So, okay, well, how do you do this without puncturing Arnold's just enormous ego? So what Ethan Allen does is he tells Arnold, okay, all right, you can be you can join my expedition as a quote volunteer officer serving at my quote left side, close quote, phrases that are legally meaningless, right? Like, I want to be clear. Like, these are just fancy words. They carry no weight. Arnold has no authority here, but he at least gets to write home later and be like, look at me, I was a fancy boy. Like, I'm very
Right, right.
important. And in fact,
Which,
in later letters, Arnold tries to claim total credit for the whole thing. He says,
sure,
I was in
sure.
charge, but
I mean, I recently read Mike Duncan's book on Lafayette, and it's not entirely dissimilar. Like, here comes this like 19-year-old guy who just shows up in, finally shows up in, I was at Philadelphia where they were recruiting or whatever, and it's like, I'm a fancy boy. I would like to be a general in your army, and they're like, well, don't have any other officers. Sure, why not?
why not?
Um, but I don't know that that is on Ethan Allen's mind because of the timing and stuff like that. But like,
Yeah.
it was a very this idea of like just showing up as an officer to command the forces on the ground was something that was in the air, I guess.
Yeah, so you're dead on, right? And one of the things that I'm a veteran, but a lot of people that I talk to who aren't veterans often like don't really understand the like officer enlisted distinction, which is like super important in modern Western style militaries. But it is not necessarily an intuitive concept. And the way I always explain is like, no, it's a class distinction. It is a
Hmm.
holdover from the time period that we are talking about right now, when the enlisted men, the privates, the sergeants, the dudes who are doing the bulk of the fighting and the killing and the dying, were mud people, right? Oh, they're farmers and craftsmen and ooh, icky lowborn people. And the officers, oh, they're gentlemen, they're
Right, right.
fancy lads. They deserve to be in charge, not because of just because of who they are, like innately, because you were born to money and class and status. So it's only natural that you are in charge of the mud people.
Yeah.
um and so yeah, because Arnold was not quite born to money. He was born to a high class family, but his dad lost the family inheritance, and then Arnold had to build it back up through commerce, which was a little bit shameful. But like, because of his background and his education and so forth, like in the culture of the time, like, oh, he's just sort of naturally supposed to be in charge, which kind of segues, I think, into the gaming application of this weird story, which is
Nice.
that what what you have here is this military operation that is about to kick off. And um, I guess actually I should say the end of the story, which is that they cross the lake. The British don't see them coming. They're over the walls before anybody knows they're inside. They take everybody prisoner. No one is killed on either side. One person I think gets hit with a sword. I don't even think he gets like stabbed or anything. And like, big win, big win. Ethan Allen, the commander of the fort, comes out in his nightshirt and is like, "Oh, who should I surrender to?" And Ethan Allen cries out that he is here on behalf of quote God and the Continental Congress, close quote. No, no, excuse me, the Great Jehovah and the Continental
Mm.
Congress, which is one heck of a line. Um, but
And he also had opinions on the quality of the fabric of the guy's nightshirt.
oh, I don't remember that.
No, no, I'm making a joke about the
Oh, okay.
modern use of the name Ethan Allen.
Um, but and like Arnold doesn't spoil the thing and it all goes fine. But Arnold very easily could have spoiled the thing.
Right.
Um, and so from a gaming perspective, I'm a big believer in this kind of meets two of things that I'm big believers in. Thing number one, when you do warfare at the table, the vast majority of RPGs handle that care about things like combat um, do a good job handling like small unit operations, 5 PCs versus 10 NPCs, something like that.
Mhm.
But they kind of break down. They generally break down for larger things, and it's hard for the players to feel impactful. So what you want to do is if you're going to do like a big battle at your table, what you want to do is find a piece of that battle where the player characters can turn the tide of the battle through some small unit operation, right? They are the ones who take the enemy cannons. They're the ones who go around the back and capture the enemy commander. They're the ones who scale the tower and, now they control the tower. And so, the wizards can do their wizard things or whatever. Like, you want to take this enormous focus and you want to shrink it down to the sort of thing that the player characters are accustomed to handling well and that the rules can handle well. And the other thing that I'm a big believer in this context is if you have kind of a straightforward, plain, like, meh, sure, everybody's going to come over on Friday night, we're going to play, but like, I'm not sure it's going to be a great session. Like, what you want is you want to introduce a complication. You want to take your straightforward thing and you want to complicate it. You want to have an additional moving piece, right? Just kind of rattling around inside the story because the players will behave unpredictably. And that will kind of bounce the moving piece off in unpredictable directions. And all of a sudden, you've got this very dynamic scenario again.
So you're not going to just make them roll some sneak and some perception and some like boat handling rolls and
Exactly.
that could just be perfunctory if you did that. So instead you have this like officer who you can't insult for reasons, but also he's a doofus and a windbag, and so like you kind of just need to isolate him somehow, or her. You could have a doofus female commander too.
So yeah, I love the idea of like, hey, we've got, tonight at game, we're doing a military operation, but like I, as the GM, am concerned that it's going to be a little too straightforward. It's going to be just like, okay, roll boats, roll stealth. Okay, we're done here. And so you need to introduce a complication. And what this Benedict Arnold thing is it's a fabulous complication, right? And the key, I strongly agree with what you said there. The key is that there is some in character reason why you can't just tell this person to kick rocks, right? Somebody shows up and says, I'm in charge. I'm here to disrupt the chain of command. I'm here to throw everything into chaos. And you can't just tell them, no, no, you're not. Like, this is us tying you up and leaving you on the bank of the lake while we go do
Right.
PC things. You can't do it. And in this cultural context, it's you can't do it because he has a commission, a colonel's commission from the Massachusetts legislature. But just pick something appropriate for your setting, right? Like, oh, they're from an important military order. Oh, they are. Look at this insignia. They're a personal representative of the emperor. Like, they
Right.
must never be mistreated. And so now you have Benedict Arnold along, and well, everything turned out fine for the rebels in real life, it very easily could have not have, right? Like Benedict Arnold could have gotten to the walls and then been like, ah, my brave fellows, after me, and like tried to lead troops in some chaotic other direction so that he could take all the glory for himself. And like, yeah, so the players have to be prepared for that possibility. If they don't prevent that possibility from arising, they have to respond to it. Now you have this wonderful, delightful complication that's going to hopefully lead to the sort of session that your players will want to tell stories about after the fact. Like, oh, do you remember? Like, oh man, you got such a bad role to convince him that he should accept being at the left hand, and like, oh, he insisted on being on the right hand, and we tried to explain to him that there was no legal difference, but then he said, oh, I'm on the right hand, so I'm giving orders now. And,
Yeah, it's yeah. I like the summary of the session that you're imagining happening. It's uh yeah. I mean yeah, it's it's good. I mean, those are things that you consistently talk about that complicate the scenario a little bit and the the thing. Is there I know we probably should move on to the other topic, but is there a way to incorporate this kind of thing that springs to mind, not in a military situation? Like what's maybe some top suggestions for doing a similar thing, but changing the venue from a night military operation to some other venue?
So really, what I mean, if you generalize it, what it boils down to is you have something going on that's very delicate, something that is a plan, a scheme, an intent that is where everything needs to go just right, and then you have somebody showing up and saying, "Hello, it's me, the opposite of everything going just right. Whatever you were counting on happening, like I am the antithesis of that not happening, but for social, political, or cultural reasons, you can't get rid of me." And kind of, I think if you generalize it, that's what it boils down to. And if you can extrapolate from that kind of generality, then yeah, there's loads and loads of places that you can insert this.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, anything else to say about Arnold or anything, or should we explore another factor of the battle of the 13 colonies, the um
Yeah, let's push. The next thing that I would like to talk about, that I came here prepared to talk about, is the this really really cool um, cultural community in both the American colonies and the United States preceding the Civil War. So kind of from the late colonial era up to the American Civil War, there was a community of people who had escaped slavery and their descendants living in a place called the Great Dismal Swamp on the North Carolina Virginia border. And this is so cool.
yes,
So
tell us more. I mean, I've driven definitely past a sign that when I was in North Carolina that's like this way to the Great Dismal Swamp. But we drove on from there. So
I visited once as like a teeny tiny child, and all I remember is that at the interpretive center they were growing peanuts. So, parents out there, when you are taking your teeny tiny children to cool places, hey, just remember, all they're going to remember from the Grand Canyon is that they had an ice cream there. Um, so today the Great Dismal Swamp is 750 square miles. But before we started draining it, it was 2,000 square miles, so a really good sized swamp. It's along the border between Virginia and North Carolina. It kind of abuts to the ocean, like it gradually turns from a black water, freshwater swamp to kind of fading into salt marshes and then out into the Barrier Islands and the ocean. Um, but um, it has a number of features to it that made it historically really really relevant for people fleeing slavery, and that also then makes it very gameable. One is that within the Great Dismal Swamp, which at the time was often referred to simply as the Dismal, within the Dismal, you had a great variety of different kinds of terrain and geography. There was a vast marsh of reeds called the Green Sea. At the heart of the swamp, there's Lake Drummond, which is just like a big open water lake. There's all these like cypress forests. There's raised mounds and hummocks of earth with oak trees growing on them. Some of them are several feet above the water. Some of them are barely above the water. There's patches of sucking mud. There's all these kind of natural canals winding their way through. And the whole place is just a labyrinth. It's absolutely like it's barely mappable, and and everything, fades into everything else. So the fastest way to get around is by canoe or in a small boat, but the waterways, intersect and fork and dead end in totally unpredictable ways. So you have to know the swamp to get around in it. And if you're not going by water, then you're going by land along these raised areas, which are just as labyrinthine. And then on top of it all, the black water of the swamp is full of these plant defensive compounds called tannins, which some swamp plants put tannins in their wood, in their flesh, to so that they don't rot. Microorganisms and termites and stuff, they find tannins poisonous. And when these plants die, the tannins leach into the water, and then the tannins leach into everything else, which means that like kind of nothing ever rots in the Dismal, and like simultaneously everything is rotting because it's a swamp, but also nothing is rotting, which means there's just incredible deadfall, like dead fallen trees everywhere mixed in with the living trees, which just further makes this whole place a labyrinth, because you'll just be, doop, doop, dooping along, and then like here is a giant wall of dead trees that have all fallen on top of one another. And like there's no way to safely climb over, there's no way to go around without going into the sticking mud anyway. So this place is a nightmare to go into if you're not familiar with it. So, great place to hide.
Exactly.
And the first kind of documented case we have of people hiding in the Dismal, is in 1715, at the end of the Tuscarora War. The Tuscaroras are a native nation that at the time lived not too far from the Great Dismal Swamp. They lost a war with white settlers. And most of the Tuscaroras at the time moved to New York State to join their Haudenosaunee relatives. But some of them instead chose to stay more local and moved into the Great Dismal Swamp, where they were confident that they would not be followed, and in fact, that confidence was deserved. And then as decades continued to go by, folks who were escaping slavery. These were primarily African people, African descended people, but also large numbers of native people who had been enslaved by the colonists, and escaped, moved into the Great Dismal Swamp. And there is a word in English for people who have escaped slavery and founded a new, hard to reach community in the hinterland. That word is maroons. So they're forming this maroon community in the Great Dismal Swamp. And by the time of the Revolution, we have writers confidently saying, and I'm sure it's a certain amount of speculation, but I have no real reason to doubt them, that there are people living in the Great Dismal Swamp, um, who were born there and were adults and had never seen an outsider, because they're staying deep in the swamp. And something that's really interesting about the nature of the swamp that really contributes to the unique character of the communities, the historical communities within it, is that you can think of the swamp as like a series of concentric rings. And while the rings aren't like terrain distinct, what they are distinct in is how easy it is for outsiders to come into the swamp. Outsiders can penetrate the outer ring relatively easily, but the further you get into the swamp, the harder it is to get there, and then the harder it is to get back out. So some people are choosing to live in the center of the swamp, where they are totally protected. Um, but they are also then totally cut off from the outside world. And then you have people on the outer ring who are running a risk by staying there. There's always a chance that somebody with a mind to make a quick buck is going to raid into the swamp, try to grab you, grab your children, haul you out of there, and say, "Ha! Now I own you." But by staying closer to the outer ring, you're able to find employment. And the white settlers near the swamp would hire on Maroons for labor, right? And they would pay them in money. And this was, of course, illegal, but who's going to follow up on it? And
Right.
one of the big sources of employment for Maroons on the outer edge of the swamp um, was people um, who sought the lumber from cypress trees in the swamp. Um, cypress is famously rot and weather resistant, and so it makes great roof shingles. But in order to cut down cypress trees and turn them into roof shingles, you have to go into the impenetrable labyrinthine swamp. And Furthermore, that too, at least in the colonial era, is illegal. All those giant cypress trees are the property of the crown because they can be turned into shipmasts. They are a strategic resource. It is illegal to cut them down. So if you're going to make a living as a shingle reseller, you have to be working with laborers who aren't going to rat you out to the government. Well, who's not going to go to the government? The Maroons, right? They have no desire to go talk to the government. So a lot of folks in the swamp are earning a living making roofing shingles. Simultaneously, some companies, including one co-owned by George Washington, are digging canals into the swamp to try to drain it. And a lot of the canal labor is Maroons. Interestingly, a lot of the canal labor is also people who were at the time enslaved. And a lot of those people then, surprise, surprise, when you have enslaved people working alongside Maroons, they talk, and the Maroons are just like, "Hey, you could just drop your shovel and like run with me," and high rates of attrition amongst enslaved laborers on the canals. Um, but you have all this going on in the outer ring, and so folks living in the outer ring, they have money, they can go in. I mean, they literally can go into town and buy things, but also they can trade through intermediaries, and so they have access to things like guns and parts to repair tools that have broken. They can buy gunpowder. They can buy some of the nicer things in life, like whiskey. Um, and they then can, if they so choose, trade with the people deeper in the swamp. But the people deeper in the swamp don't necessarily have valuable trade goods with which to buy the outside things. So the deeper you go into the swamp, the less connected people are to the outside world. And we have some eyewitness reports from this period and from later periods of outsiders who have gone deep into the swamp. Um, and what they report is that the kind of the deep swamp Maroons um, are living essentially at a Stone Age level of technology. They are dressing entirely in furs, and they are leading a lifestyle that is centers around not being discovered, right? Because if no one can find you, no one can grab you.
Right.
And so they're living, a lot of them are living in these very small single family homesteads that are well and truly hidden. Some of them are even living underground, right? Yeah, on some of these higher hummocks,
Yeah.
dig a tunnel down. Because yeah, if your family is living down there, no one will ever be like paddling past and be like, "Look, a house."
Right.
And but In the true center of the swamp, there are and we know this from archaeological evidence, there are some genuine villages with multiple homes, often on stilts. We know there were homes in the giant marsh, the Green Sea, that were built on stilts and were kind of in multi-home villages. Um, and we also have some documentary evidence suggesting that the folks who were living in kind of single family homesteads, well hidden in the marsh, um, were um, were deeply and understandably paranoid. Very concerned with making sure that no one follows you home, because if
Mm.
they follow you home, then they know where you live, and then maybe your family can be targeted. Um, and so we have references to like, oh yeah, if you try to follow someone home, like they will sneak around, they will go around a corner and find a good ambush site, and then when you come around the corner, they'll just kill you. So like, don't do that. But I think that this is incredibly gameable, right?
Sure. I
This
mean, the labyrinthine swamp is like, just call it that, like it's like it's a setting in and of itself.
and it has this amazing culture living within it, and the culture, like, I really love that the culture is not um it is not uniform, that the culture changes based on geography, um and yeah, like, just if basically the adventure is go into a fictional swamp you have created modeled on the Dismal Swamp and get back out, right? And because of the unique nature of the swamp and the culture, the maroon culture in the swamp, that is way more than just like, oh yeah, roll a couple of exploration checks. Hey, you got it and you got
Right.
back out. Like, no, you're gonna be running into people. You're gonna be getting yourself into trouble, right? Like, oh, sorry, you failed the check, and now you're in the stick this the sucking mud. But also you're running into people, right? And these people are gonna have very different reactions to you depending on their personal histories and their family histories. I mentioned the Maroon community was still extant by the time of the Civil War. Like, people all through the decades before the American Civil War, people were continuing to flee to the Great Dismal Swamp, and of course the descendants of Tuscaroras and the first generation of enslaved people, like, yeah, like, they're still there, right?
Right.
And actually during this later period, um, slave catchers are making a greater effort to penetrate the outer edges of the swamp. So living in the outer edges of the swamp becomes a lot less safe, and people tend to retreat deeper in. But yeah, like, okay, here's a person, right? Like, talk to them, role play with them, see if you can get them to guide you in. But like, if you screw it up, then they are definitely going to be like, oh yeah, I can definitely take you where you need to go. And they lead you through the labyrinth to the place where they are confident you are never going to be able to find your way out of, and then they just leave. Um, and so, reasons to go into the swamp. Um, you might be trying to get the Maroons, to recruit Maroons for some sort of political conflict, or some sort of operation. This is a thing that really happened in real life during the Revolutionary War. Many Maroons fought on the British side. The British governor of Virginia, Lord Dunmore, um, made kind of famously offered freedom to enslaved people and the descendants of enslaved people who would fight for the British. And many Maroons took him up on his offer and served, especially as scouts, which, yeah, makes lots of sense. So
Sure.
you might be going into the swamp to try to find somebody who, like, hey, find a local leader, right, who you can convince to speak on your behalf, like, hey, you should get involved in whatever's going on outside the swamp. You might be in search of some sort of secret knowledge. You know, there's something that was known, but the last person who knew it um, fled into the swamp 100 years ago, and so. Well, I sure hope they told their descendants that the knowledge has been
Right.
passed down, but there's no way to know unless we go in there and try to find somebody to talk to. And um, of course, there's really cool folklore around the swamp. Supposedly, the Lake Drummond at the center, supposedly it has no bottom. It has a bottom, but in folklore, it has no bottom.
Sure.
Uh, in folklore, there are tunnels that connect under the swamp to the sea. There is some sort of lake monster that lives in the swamp. And definitely my personal favorite is that there's a famous historical witch named Grace Sherwood who lived in the swamp, and Grace Sherwood was definitely a real historical person. Um, and But my personal favorite is that there are quote, the terrible people of the mists, close quote, who are a
Yeah.
twist on the will o' the wisp mythology. And the terrible people of the mists, they carry their lanterns to guide people seeking freedom into the swamp and take them along the safe paths. But then people who come in with malign intent, the terrible people of the mists lead them astray so that they go into the swamps and are lost and are drowned. And I think that's fabulous.
Yeah, I mean, so much of this sounds like it would fit. You just don't even you just apply some new names to it, and it's like a fantasy setting done and done and done, you know. Um, I was thinking about some of the, the sci-fi elements also, like something like in a more technological context, you could have some uh, you know, uh, some ship, the away team has to go find the downed shuttle that landed in this place,
Hmm.
and what is their fate? Um, yeah, so there's lots of ways to incorporate this kind of stuff, this geographical and cultural milieu into all kinds of settings.
Yeah, I was reading up on it and was like, oh my God, like this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Like I have to tell the world. So anyway, this is me telling the world.
Yeah, I'm reminded of like, obviously there's the whole enslavement aspect here of, yeah, people who are engaging in enslaving other people, and then those, there's always like an to be too I don't know, too technical about it or whatever. Like there's an out migration from the enslavement area into other places, and they're almost always marginal.
Hmm.
These, because otherwise, you'd have the slave catcher gangs and stuff like that coming in and just rounding up the people again. This kind of pattern of is in Brazil, and it's in, I'm thinking of like,
The Caribbean, there's
yeah,
lots and lots
yeah,
of historic maroon communities in the Caribbean.
right. I'm also thinking about stuff from like the what is often, well, like, the edges of the Ottoman Empire and stuff like that, where you've got um you know the battles between, well, I guess they're pre-Ottomans or whatever, but the caliphate in Syria and stuff versus the remnants of the Byzantine Empire, and they're like recruiting various people from Armenia to do their dirty work for them, and they're that took about the layers of the civilization or whatever, where there's people who are living deep in the mountains who have nothing to do with this conflict, and then you've got people that are right on the edge of the conflicting empires who are, what, whoever paid us the most money is whose army we joined today, and they're using both sides as a source of revenue, and trading maybe deeper into the, stuff like that. It's a phenomenon that happens, these sort of layers or rings of isolation,
Hmm.
or and contact. But this obviously particular example is, here in the United States. Ah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just adding to what you said. I've mostly been quiet because I don't you've been on a story. You've been telling a while, just be quiet and let you tell the story. You did all the research. I have nothing to add. Um, so yeah, I think it's such a I don't know. I love your enthusiasm for this sort of place, Of course it I'm also thinking about how, I mean, this is sort of beyond the scope of this discussion a little bit, but
Ooh.
like I'm thinking about these marginal places, right? They are like monuments of achievement and the to survive under these conditions, but then they're also sort of like uh it sure does suck that somebody else made these people go away and put them in the place where that was the least worst option,
It
So
really,
I'm sure there's a lot of, like you said, you went to the interpretive center. I mean, I'm sure this is a hard thing to remember, because of that, I mean, it's cool that it's a cool historical thing, but also I'm sure there's a lot of like, you know, pain connected to all of this sort of thing. I'm sure. I
yeah.
don't know.
The as far as I'm aware, in the wake of the American Civil War, the Dismal largely emptied out. As far as I'm aware, there's no one living in the Great Dismal Swamp today who claims descent from the historical Maroon community. But um, my understanding is that the Maroon community kind of separated to the four winds, and that there's not, if there is a community today that says, "Hello, we are the descendants of the Maroons of the Great Dismal Swamp." I am not aware of that community, and that that is the story of so many diasporas, and including African diasporas in the United States, that um, that you have these remarkable stories, and then the community is broken up or breaks up, and there isn't necessarily specific people that can point to themselves and say, I am the heir of this memory. And yeah, I mean, that's America.
Yeah. Right. Both. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it makes it sort of invites anyone to carry on the memory, but then it also is sort of like the memory becomes divorced from or separate from people,
Mhm.
it is, yeah, it's a, yeah, that's America. It's a complicated place in that respect. Yeah. All right. Well, sorry to end it on a down note there. Uh, I don't know. It's like I don't know. It's not all rah rah. The whole the all of it. Especially since Europeans first showed up in North America, it's not been all rah rah all the time. And I think we, you and I, and people that look like us need to remember that as well. There's been some truly incredible things accomplished, but also some pretty horrible things done. So, uh, yeah. Anyway, thank you for bringing these stories, Tristan. Uh, tell people where they might go follow up. I think you talked about Grace the Witch in your blog post a little more than the one sentence you said. So if they want to go read that blog post,
If
where
you
is it?
if you want to go read that blog post, you can go to moltensulfur.com, or you can just Google Molten Sulfur blog. That's molten sulfur, like the yellow element that, but it's melted. You can find me at Molten Sulfur on Twitter, on Blue Sky, and dice.camp. I'm also still dutifully running a Molten Sulfur Facebook page. Not that anybody sees it or interacts with it. It just But yeah, and then if you would like more Molten Sulfur, more Tristan Zimmerman stuff, I put out a blog post about something really cool from real world history or folklore, and then how to file the serial numbers off of it and drop it into your ongoing campaign. I put out such a blog post every other Tuesday, and in addition to that, I have several books out, including Shanty Hunters, the Emmy Award-winning role-playing game about collecting magical sea shanties in the year 1880.
Oh, what such a fantastic list of accomplishments. It's great. Yeah. Well, thank you for coming and presenting these pieces from history, these stories to add into our gaming tables. And yeah, thank you for your continued work on all the on the blog and all of these things. So
Thank you so
uh,
much for having me, Matt. It is genuinely always a pleasure to be on the show.
excellent. Well, and until next time, yeah, we'll we'll be reading up on the history, I guess.